Good morning and welcome to One Baha'i, that regular show where I just sit back and talk a little bit about the Baha'i faith. As you know, it's nothing official. It's just me, one individual, one Baha'i. So this is probably going to be a longer episode than normal. Today I want to talk about, continue to talk about the advent of divine justice. And I want to look at that third spiritual requisite. Freedom from prejudice. Now, it's interesting that Shoghi Effendi begins by talking about it as freedom from prejudice. But then, when he describes it in detail, he begins as to racial prejudice. So, it's not that racial prejudice is the only prejudice we need to overcome and be free from. But that specific area of prejudice, racism and racial prejudice, is what he calls the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community. As a quick explanation, racism and racial prejudice are not the same thing. Racism, as I'm sure you've heard many times, is specifically a form of oppression. So, in the United States, it is only the white people who can be racist, but all people can be racially prejudiced. So, when you hear people talking about only whites can be racist, well, that's true by definition. They are the only ones in that position of power. But all people can have racial prejudice. And that's what Shoghi Effendi is talking about here. He's not specifically talking about racism. He's talking about racial prejudice. And he says it should be regarding as constituting the most vital and challenging issue. So it's not an easy one, but it's imperative that we deal with it. He goes on and describes just how difficult it's going to be. He says, the ceaseless exertions which this issue of paramount importance calls for, the sacrifices it must impose, the care and vigilance it demands, the moral courage and fortitude it requires, the tact and sympathy it necessitates, invest this problem with an urgency and importance that cannot be overestimated. When I look at those words that he uses, ceaseless exertions, paramount importance, sacrifice, care, vigilance, it demands, moral courage, fortitude, tact, and sympathy. To me, it's really describing a marathon, an effort that is so overpowering, overwhelming, but doable. As we know, it's not easy to run a marathon, but it is possible with great effort and training. And he goes on and he says that this is the responsibility of everyone. Neither race has the right or can conscientiously claim to be regarded as absolved from such an obligation. And then we are encouraged to look to Abdu'l-Baha. Let them remember his courage, his genuine love, his informal and indiscriminating fellowship, his contempt for and impatience of criticism, tempered by his tact and wisdom. I find those quite interesting. Courage. It takes courage to step into this field of endeavor, to strive to overcome racial prejudice. It takes courage. There's no question of that. genuine love. I love that qualifier. It's not a superficial love. It's a genuine love. Informal and indiscriminating fellowship. It's spontaneous. It was not always in these formal settings. Yes, Abdu'l-Baha spoke at the 4th annual meeting of the NAACP, but he also spoke with people informally, casually, on the street. And he spoke with everybody. He was indiscriminating in that regard. So while there is place for the formal, it's also the informal that begins to wed the hearts together. I couldn't decide whether I was going to say wed the hearts or knit the hearts. It's going to wit the hearts together. No. It's going to wed the hearts or knit the hearts together. You see, sometimes we're so good at doing these formal things. But how often do we go to a movie together? Go bowling? Play in the park? You know, it's when we do these informal things that we become more closely associated with each other. His contempt for and impatience of criticism. I love that. But this impatience and contempt was tempered by tact and wisdom. So he wouldn't lash out at somebody for criticizing. He would correct them with tact and wisdom. And you know, when dealing with the race unity issue, I've seen people critical of each other. I've seen people impatient with that criticism. I've seen contempt for people who are critical. I've seen all of this in the positive and in the negative, usually in the negative. But when I have seen people respond to this with tact and wisdom, that's when I see the hearts of the individuals involved beginning to change. He goes on, Shoghi Effendi goes on, and you'll notice I'm just kind of skimming through the section. There's way too much to go into great detail here in 10 minutes. He says that it is the obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it. I find those words, again, quite intriguing in light of recent issues. Nurture, absolutely. Encourage, yes. And safeguard. When I see the white demonstrators acting as a shield between the African Americans and the police, that fills my heart with joy. It's so beautiful to watch. They are using their so-called white privilege to great advantage. Nurture, encourage, and safeguard. Shoghi Effendi recognized that there was a danger. And he gave us the solution. It's really just up to us to act on it. He continues on. A tremendous effort is required by both races. Again, he reminds us that this is not something that's going to be easy. This is that pivotal message in Baha'u'llah's revelation, the message of unity. It is something that we will take 1,000 years to truly embrace. Why do we think it might be easy? The Guardian tells us it's not going to be easy. A tremendous effort is required. He says, let them call to mind the warnings of Abdu'l-Baha and visualize while there is yet time. He says this back in 1938. Visualize while there is yet time the dire consequences that must follow if this challenging and unhappy situation is not definitely remedied. Watching from the outside, watching from Canada, it looks like things are falling apart. It feels like there is a civil war brewing. I don't know any other way to phrase it. These are dire consequences. In other areas, Abdu'l-Baha talked about the streets running with blood if the situation is not dealt with. We've seen blood on the streets. And I don't think it's going to get any better until we really move with all our might to overcome this issue. You know, I was planning on going on to the next paragraph, the last paragraph in that section that is often called the most challenging issue, which I think is an issue to begin with. It's not the most challenging issue. It's the most vital and challenging issue. But I'm not going to go into it today. I want to talk about it tomorrow instead, because we're already at 12 minutes, and I think there's a lot to think about already. The greatest question, I think, facing the Friends right now, facing all of us, is how do we raise the awareness of the importance of this issue without it devolving into a protest and a violent clash? I don't have answers for that, but I do know it is something that we need to address. So thank you for joining me again today. I really appreciate it. Feel free to hit the like, the share, subscribe, whatever you want. You know I'm very casual about it all. In the meantime, be active, be safe, and we'll talk tomorrow.